To unlock access to all of the 2024 MozCon presentations, go to moz.com/MozCon/register. In the meantime, enjoy Garrett Sussman's illuminating talk for free.
What a great crowd. Look at everybody here today. I'm already feeling such amazing vibes. I hope everyone reaches out to me and we chat. This is such an incredible honor, privilege to be here today, and I am excited to talk about SEO Mind Games. I'm going to start with a little hypnotism, no. Big caveat, this doesn't work on everybody. That said, when it comes to SEO, we really need to think about the way that our minds work and the psychology. But it's been a wild 2 months, 12 months, 18 months. Like, shout out to all the presenters who have had to change their decks 5 times, 10 times, 15 times. Went through AI overviews. I went through, I got the bingo card up there. You'll see what I'll cover, and you'll see all this throughout all the different presentations over the course of the next few days. And you know what I didn't have on my bingo card? Google leaks. Honestly, I did not see that one coming. My boss, Mr. Mike King, put out an article you can check out where he went into it. And so this past week, he's been on vacation. It's been an interesting experience in our Slack channels, to say the least. But as you can tell, I am hyped up. I did not even have any coffee this morning, which is ridiculous because I love coffee. Like, I drink a lot of coffee. And that said, my Jewish mother is concerned. Garrett, Bubba, you drink too much coffee. You're going to have a heart attack. So I need to have some ammunition to prove it. It's not a big deal. So I did the Starbucks barista thing. I drank 3 cups a day. I will be fine. So we're off to Google. And we search on Google, and we think to ourselves, is coffee healthy for you? Is it unhealthy for you? Uh-oh. Google is already telling me what I need to search for. So I go to Google and I say, is coffee healthy for you? And bam, speaking of Healthline, comes through. Oh yeah, coffee is good. It's great. You'll be fine. You'll be a healthy human being. Meanwhile, my Jewish mother's on there. She says, is coffee unhealthy for you? Well, what does she find? She finds an article that says, well, yeah, a lot of coffee can really make you anxious and do damage. And, well, we're both right, obviously, right? There's a little bit of nuance to it. So why is coffee bad for you? She doubles down and she finds a Reddit thread. We all love our Reddit forums on Google results these days. 120. So she feels good. She knows that she has all these examples of why coffee is bad for you. And I know why coffee is good for you. And you look at the featured snippets, and it's fascinating. You see Mayo Clinic up there for why it's good for you. And then you see both Harvard for good and bad, covering both sides of the equation. So for SEOs, we're appearing in all this for our content. We can use these biases to show up. You can find a completely neutral search, coffee and health, completely different results, which is what I want to plant the seed in, which is the searches that we make and the results that we choose based on our audience formulate our whole purpose with SEO. It all comes down to our audience and the people who are doing the searches, and we live in our SEO bubble, right? Like, it's hard to kind of step outside of the way that we think about searching. And so what I'm going to cover over the rest of the 30 minutes that I have is confirmation bias, search behavior, beyond confirmation bias, all these other cognitive biases across the search journey. Understand your audience and their biases, creating that really great content strategy to address it, and then ultimately, the future, Google AI overviews, it's here to stay. What does that mean for our biases? Now, we all come to our searches with a ton of context. AI-generated image, I like using it. You'll see more of those. No guilt here. I got a beautiful wife, an amazing little toddler at home. I am from Jersey, live in Virginia, lived in California, lived in Louisiana. I like the Sixers. I like psychology books. I had a bad day a couple weeks ago, and I've got an adorable mini golden doodle named Lucy. Each and every one of you brings a completely different context to your searches. And it informs the way that we think about it. SEO sits in marketing and psychology, right? We're all trying to show up and almost predict the way that our audience searches. It's not the 10, 15 years ago where it was just one or two head term keywords. The mom and the NLPs are able to understand our searches, our queries significantly more effectively, so people use more complex searches. So what does Google care about when it comes to the searches? We've seen, all the decks, the DOJ lawsuit leaks. They care about relevance, authority, and user experience. That was the big revelation. We all kind of really knew that they use click data and user behavior in the rankings. Well, the 2020 DOJ lawsuit kind of confirmed that through these slides. And the Google leak, and you'll hear all the caveats about, we don't have context for the API leak. We don't know what any of this means, but there is a confirmation in the sense that this all at least exists. So Google leak kind of confirms that they do use clicks for rankings. They might not still, they probably do, but at some point they considered it. We got to take that into consideration. Site authority, domain authority, probably exists. It's in there. Not definitively, but we can take that into our consideration. And embeddings for relevance, the way that they take words and translate them into mathematical values and use that in order to make sure that the searches that we put in actually deliver relevant results. So, as human beings, we have hundreds of cognitive biases at play. Daniel Kahneman, a famous psychologist who died recently, wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about these ideas that as humans, we need a positive view of ourselves. We're very fragile, ego-driven organisms. We need consistency in our beliefs. And honestly, we don't want to think too hard. He actually came up with this idea of the two systems of our brain. And I'm going to try not to blow your brains, but system one is intuitive, reactive, emotional. It doesn't think too hard. It just goes with the flow. And then when that is overloaded, we have this second system that requires more complex thinking. So imagine that you are driving down the street, you're having a conversation with your friend, the music's on. We can all do that on autopilot. System one, just rocking and rolling. Then, all of a sudden, you have to change lanes to avoid a car. I'm not going to keep talking with my friend. I can't do that. That's overload. That's when system two kicks in. It takes actual biological energy to think hard. We don't like it. We like to keep things easy, and your audiences do when it comes to SEO. I will connect all this. So cognitive ease is the goal of humans, and we want to make that as easy as possible. The problem is we create all of these little shortcuts, these heuristics, these cognitive biases that we use that most of the time work in our favor in terms of not having to overload our brains with too many thoughts. But sometimes they're a little tricky. With cognitive ease, we're trying to look at these repeated experiences, getting a clear display of information, getting these primed ideas and good mood that ultimately translate to something that feels comfortable, familiar, feels good. So that's when these biases start to rear their face in search. And confirmation bias, in my opinion, is the biggest one that influences the way that we interact with our audience and try to generate organic traffic. Confirmation bias is this tendency to favor information that confirms one's existing belief. Like I said, we don't want to be proven wrong. Now, a lot of times we want to try and get more audience, get them on our sides, but when it comes down to it, we like to think we're right, like my coffee example. And so there was a fascinating study done in 2015 by Kahan, and they formulated this framework for the way that people search, right? You've got a problem, and you frame the problem, and depending on your familiarity, you're going to create your query, your search, based on how comfortable you are with the topic. And you're going to most likely phrase it in a way that's probably going to support whatever result you're trying to find. Now, there are a lot of people who don't do that, but the vast majority of us, when we don't know what we don't know, we kind of dive in and point ourselves in a certain direction. We get this context, and then we see these results, and then there's a second bias in terms of what we ultimately click on, right? So what they did in this study is they had a bunch of people look at the relationship between coffee and hypertension. And what was really interesting is then they looked at the relationship between coffee and no hypertension. They just switched the negative slightly. And what was interesting there is they found that the results were in essence the same. It was not statistically significant that there was a difference between the results for coffee and hypertension and coffee and no hypertension. Now, this is where I want you to think about it in terms of your own keyword strategy. Lily was mentioning about critical thinking and actually finding the type of content that your audience is looking for. In a second study, they then compared to coffee and hypertension, high blood pressure, with coffee and low blood pressure. And we all know keywords, words matter, right? That's how Google understands what information it gets, is the actual words, keywords. So when you switch that up, you start to see statistically significant differences in the results. So you start to think about your audience. Are they just looking for the negative and finding this balanced result? Or are they using actual dissimilar words and getting a completely different set of results, all based on what they're actually looking for, that confirmation bias? So start to look at these results and how they differ. And the study came up with this concept of similar term opposition versus dissimilar term opposition. And I want you to think about that with all of your keywords, with all of your topic clusters. Are they biased? Does recycling benefit the environment? Similar term opposition would just be that slight negative, right? Recycling doesn't benefit the environment. Somewhat similar, but yet you do see different results. And then dissimilar opposition. Does the recycling harm the environment? Switching out that word harm, and you see a completely different set of results. See another example, saving for retirement, right? That's the big question. All of us millennials are in trouble, right? Retirement saving strategies, totally neutral. Just you're going to get a basic explanation there. Now, why is a Roth IRA best for retirement savings? All of a sudden, we're starting to see that confirmation bias. When I throw Roth IRA in there, I want him to tell me, why is it the best? Well, Google's going to go and tell me the best. Now, similar term opposition is still using that term Roth IRA, but it's like, why is it not effective? Now, I'll see that balanced link similar to the first one, but when I introduce the dissimilar term opposition, and I start to see benefits of employer-sponsored 401k, I add this whole other set of keywords into the search results, you see a completely different result to consider. And so, going back to it, are your audience searching for those dissimilar term opposition keywords? And are you covering that with your content? Another example of keto, keto diet basics, keto diet for effective weight loss. One set. Keto diet not effective for weight loss. And then keto diet versus low fat for weight loss. And we're thinking about this in the terms of, yes, we always as SEOs want to be resourceful and go after those head terms that will get us the most search volume. And we'll get into this with the AI stuff, but the future really is in that granular, making the most bang for your buck in terms of what will drive business value with what your audience is actually searching for. And we are fighting it in the SERP results. We all know this. We've all experienced on people also ask how when you search for a brand name, Google's pointing you in a certain direction. There is that bias that shows up. If I'm looking for General Mills, is General Mills owned by China? I did not even think to ask that. And yet Google is planting that in my brain. Abercrombie & Fitch. Apparently there was a massive scandal that happened. Did not know. Brand reputation gets thrown into these results. And then, as we all know, when autocomplete happens as well by what other people are already searching, if you are a child of the 80s, 90s like me, and you ask, what is Nike, you're going to, how are Nike shoes made, you're going to see that sweatshop conversation. Really cringy, uncomfortable. But that's what Google is still pointing us in that direction. That's where these biases start to show up. Now, beyond confirmation bias, there's a ton of other ones that we need to take into consideration, these little tricks that our brains plan ourselves. And for the most part, our audiences don't care if we're getting it right or wrong, especially when the stakes aren't necessarily that high. Position bias, that's why we're all in the job, right? is to rank number one, to be at the top? Well, psychology confirms that we interact more with what's at the top of the SERP. So whether it's an AI overview, a featured snippet, people also ask, there's a reason probably that Google got rid of page 2. You know, it used to exist. It does not exist anymore. We're only interacting. And I respect the person who goes to page 5, 6, scrolls and scrolls and scrolls for their result. You're not going to find anything great down there, but you know, you're putting in the effort. But that's one of those biases. Familiar heuristics. Kahneman and Tversky came up with this idea in the 1970s, the idea that we favor things that we are familiar with over what's novel, new. There was actually a fascinating study, really messed up when you think about it, by Kuhn and Gallinat, basically in 2013, where they put people under an MRI and showed them Pepsi versus Coke, images of the brand, and their brains actually lit up more when they saw Coke, because we know Coke does a fantastic job with their advertising they've done for the last 10, 20 years. That visibility makes a major difference in terms of our familiarity and our preferences, and that shows up in our SERPs. And we all know, I'm not going to get political here, but if you search for something news, you know what news organization you're more likely going to choose, right? If you're seeing similar headlines, I know someone who reads New York Times is probably not going to click on the Fox News article, and someone who reads Fox News is probably not going to click on CNN. Like, we have these brand affinities. We all know this. It's so important to our brand. Authority bias. We trust authorities, whether it's the government, whether it's, educational institutions, that brand, but they're not always completely 100% trustworthy. Speaking of being the 80s, 90s kids, I don't know if you're familiar with that food pyramid up there, but it was a lie. We're not supposed to eat all the bread. Well, you know what? My wife and I, we enjoy a nice bowl of pasta from time to time, but apparently it's completely different. There's a circle. I'm going to have to learn it for my daughter, figure out what nutrition is, and to be honest, they'll probably change it in 5 years anyway. Pluto is a planet. I'm sorry. I refuse to accept the fact that, yeah, let's hear it for Pluto. No, but the point is, NASA, the government, authorities don't always get it right, but we trust them no matter what they say. Right? We trust authorities for the most part. I respect people who are skeptical of authorities. I was always a goody two-shoes. If you told me to do something, I would probably do it. But most of us, psychologically, we trust authority figures, and that's what we're striving for in our branded content and our search results, becoming an authority in our industry. Halo effect. We like an association. That's why partnerships are so valuable. If someone is very likable, like Lego, probably the most universally liked brand, except when you step on a Lego, it is one of those great brands that partners with all these other brands, and they kind of they get that, almost PageRank link juice. Oh, I said link juice. I'm so sorry, if you will. They get that association with that partnership. And so we think about that in the listicles, in the affiliate space. I will admit that I am much more likely to purchase a product from Wirecutter than any other listicle because of the association and the trust I have with that brand. And so any product that's showing up in that specific brand is something that I will probably buy, and your audience probably has those same affinities as well. So the bias across the search journey, there was a really fascinating study done by Google in 2020 where we're so used to the marketing funnel, right? Awareness, consideration, familiarity, purchase, loyalty, all that stuff. And they found that it's much more complex than that, right? It's more of this ebb and flow of evaluation and experience, looking and finding information, exploration. We go and we try to discover things, and then we go back. The bias still exists, and it doesn't go away. It starts with a bias of what our friends say, what our family say, what their recommendations are, our self-identity. I remember any music I listened to in the 90s was dependent on whether or not I liked the cover band artwork. I mean, that was like a reflection of who I was. But then as you do more research, there's a different type of biases that starts to appear, whether that's expert reviews, product details, social proof. And so in their study, they actually looked at 6 different cognitive biases that showed up and how it affected people's choices. Category heuristics, the product details, the power of now, wanting to get it in this moment, social proof, star ratings, scarcity bias, what if there's nothing left, authority bias, as I mentioned, and the power of free. We all love free shipping. Thanks, Amazon. You cannot get anything without free shipping without being really annoyed. What? It's going to take 3 days to get here, and it's going to cost me money? Not cool. So what they did is they gave everyone the option of a brand across a range of different products. And then the second that they just introduced a second brand, you'll see the choice went from 100% to 80, 70, even 60 a little bit. Which makes sense. You offer some choice, you would expect not every single person is going to choose that original brand. But once they introduce those 6 supercharged, I feel like that's a ChatGPT word, the supercharged biases into the options, it jumps all the way down from 80 to 20. And this is everything, all the way from insurance down to the shampoo that you choose. And you can see how real this is because they did a third version where they introduced a fictional brand that did not exist, and people still chose the fictional brand that was supercharged with those cognitive biases. So there are all these opportunities to introduce this, but the reality is people are affected by it. Not every single person. It's not a blanket statement of it's definitely going to work, but it's a consideration about how we market in the actual SERPs and what opportunities we can take advantage of. So how do you understand your audience? How do you figure out what their biases are? And another shout out to SparkToro, but basically what you want to do is you want to find the people who love your brand and the people who have no idea who you are or have no opinion. That's where you should be focusing your effort because people don't want to change their minds. And if you haven't gotten all the people who love your brand and the people who have no opinion first, then why are you trying to be that person? And I do this, like on Twitter, if I feel someone doesn't like me, I'll be like, come on, like me, I'll try to befriend them. Don't spend your money on that in the SERPs. Right? Make sure that you get the people who do already like you, who you're fulfilling their confirmation bias and the other cognitive biases, and the people who have not made a decision yet. So SparkToro, great audience research tool. Lily had a bunch of other great tools to use as well, but to really dig into what do your audience like, what makes them tick, what are their affinities? Where are the opportunities for those partnerships so you can build that halo effect? And then another one that I've really enjoyed recently for market research is actually taking the time to survey and ask your questions of your audience for what their biases are. So, taking the time to point blank identify what those demographics, the firmographics are using a tool like Glimpse. You can identify what segments you're going to ask, and then ask them specific questions related to your topic, your product, dig in, get that information to start to inform the content you're creating and the biased keywords you're going to target. So how do you craft this bias-informed content strategy? Well, remember how we talked about the relevance, authority, and user experience? Well, that's what Google cares about. What your audience actually cares about is being right, positive associations, the familiar brands, not thinking too hard, the social proof, and the expert perspectives. So there are 3 kind of pillars that I think about when it comes to building this content strategy, starting from the beginning and then thinking more holistically. The keywords is using that process from the study that we saw from Kahan, talking all about the idea of unbiased keywords, biased keywords, similar term opposition, and dissimilar term opposition. So taking your topic cluster, taking your range of keywords, and looking for those biased opportunities that resonate with your existing audience, and then leaning into that brand. Leaning in with your statement. So if you're doing organic gardening and you are a sustainability brand, you're saying organic gardening produces healthier, more nutritious produce compared to conventional gardening methods. Don't shy away from it. Don't focus on the neutral. Make sure that you're including something that makes people who are choosing your brand feel good about it. So you can think about this in a framework I like, which is you look at your product, you look at your service, you look at your information, and does it have a potential bias? Really strong when it comes to media publications, because even if you're trying to be a neutral media publication, that doesn't exist in 2024. You have a side of the, of the aisle that you're on. Lean into it, know your brand, and be a part of it. So if it's a firm bias, you go all in, you lean in, you start to identify all of those, and you build out the content to support it. If it's a mild bias, and you might work at a brand that has strict guidelines in terms of what direction you can do, what you can say, you can either lean into it, you could cover both sides, like that Harvard example when it comes to the coffee benefits of health and unhealthiness, or partner with another brand that can say what you are unable to say, but then funnel them towards your website with partnerships. Right? Because there are some places, we all know, we've all been part of those organizations where we can't step into the conversation without going against what our executives, what our brands are okay with. So example, Kia, they did one all around, are electric cars dangerous? I thought this was a fascinating confirmation bias keyword example because they were the only car manufacturer to show up for this keyword. It was all media publications, it was all government organizations, and then Kia. So when someone who's looking for their concerns around the electric cars, they want to buy one, but they want to know whether or not it's dangerous, they're going to see Kia, and they're going to start to build that brand affinity right there and then. Are they dangerous? And then they can show their side of the story. So OpenAI made the custom GPTs available, so I went ahead and I made a custom GPT that you can use to basically take a list of keywords and identify and analyze whether or not it has any type of cognitive bias. It's not just confirmation bias, it goes through a range of others. Then it provides complementary keywords for you to work with. This is the strategic thinking that won't be tied specifically to keyword tools. If anything, it generates your ideas of how you can start thinking about the psychology behind your audience and what they're looking for. Relevance. Talk a lot about this at iPullRank with Mike King, talking about the idea that Google really does understand words as mathematical values, and when it looks at searches, it really takes into consideration the relevance mathematically between your search and the content. And so what you can do is make sure that you are showing up formulaically, mathematically, for the searches that you're doing. Information gain is another one. I know Bernard of ClearScope is going to talk about this a little bit later, but this idea that you're presenting new information, your expertise, infusing this into your content to show that you are an authority to your audience. The information gain is one of the best ways to show expertise and that you are an authority. And one example that I love for this is the fishing status. They went to identify the best places to go fishing in Lake Pontchartrain. They have them all over the country. And this is real, helpful information that you can use that any type of fisher would be looking for. This would be like, okay, I respect these guys. They know what they're talking about when it comes to finding a place to go fish. Now, the framework is run those content relevance tests against the keywords, create dedicated opinion sections, so leaning in. You can do the basics. I mean, we've all seen the what is content, the over-optimized SEO content, but make sure that you are putting your own opinion into the content to make the confirmation bias, the other cognitive biases, feel satisfied, feel like they're making the right decision. Include subject matter expertise. Gave that example there. Another resource that we created. So it's hard. We don't know how to convert words into mathematical formulas. We have OrbitWise at iPullRank, which is a free tool that can let you look at a page against a specific query and see if it is mathematically relevant in terms of the actual relevance of the content to the page. So that's a great tool to make sure if you are on the right track. MarketMuse has a really great, they're releasing a information gain score tester. What I really like about this tool is it actually shows you the gaps based compared to competitors. Who's missing information? Like, what is the information that needs to be included that's new, that's not covered for a specific keyword or topic, and it'll list out, give you those questions so you can dive into it. So MarketMuse offers that. Finally, there's brand marketing, and partnerships grow visibility across all channels because we know from the user behavior that the more people click, the higher the ratings, the more the backlinks, the more the brand familiarity. It's this virtuous cycle. User clicks matter. And so the framework there is we really do need to work with our digital PR placement teams, that we need to actually create campaigns that with messaging for our branded landing pages. I don't know how many times I've seen a Super Bowl commercial that doesn't have a specific dedicated landing page after it goes up, and people are searching for it, and then there's nothing to be found. Like, don't let those opportunities flip away. Perfect example, last summer, Barbie, Mattel, everywhere, partner with Xbox, partner with Airbnb, and Google Trends skyrocketed. Those partnerships are what are ultimately going to drive those brand searches, virtuous cycle. When it's between you and a competitor, they ultimately will choose you because they love your brand. And so finally, kind of to summarize this up, I have to talk about AI overviews because I am bullish. It's here to stay. And I think that as people start to use this more and more, they'll start to expand longer search queries, which will infuse more bias. The more words we use, the more opportunities we include cognitive bias into our searches. And as SEOs, that's something that we need to consider. We have an AI overviews threat report at iPullRank to see how that might potentially impact your searches. So to seeing when the AI overviews show up, if you're going to lose organic search traffic, take that into consideration. But to sum it up, cognitive biases shape your audience's behavior. So what can you do? You can identify your biases, flesh them out in your keywords, lean into those opinions, showcase your expertise, build your brand, and leverage your brand. Woo! That was it. What do you guys think? Thank you all. All right.
That was incredible.
Hello.
All the energy that I had hoped I would find from you on stage. Are you going to be hanging around for the next couple of days? Where can people find you?
Yes, I'll be all around. I just love having this conversation. So if I have like a serious face on my phone, feel free to come up and say hi anyway. I just love having these conversations, and we got such a great community here.
Awesome. Let's give them another round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.